Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hope you're doing well. We're continuing our reading of Friedrich Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra book. We are on a new section that's titled Poets. Let's begin. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Since I have come to know the body better, Zarathustra said to one of his disciples, the spirit is to me only quasi-spirit, and all that is permanent is also a mere parable. I have heard you say that once before. The disciple replied, and at that time you added, but the poets lie too much. Why did you say that the poets lie too much? Why, said Zarathustra? You ask, why? I am not one of those whom you may ask about their why. Is my experience but of yesterday? It was long ago that I experienced the reasons for my opinions. So, why did you say the poets lie too much? It's probably concerning romance. I'm not really into romance poetry. I like horror, things about nature, suffering, tragedy, things like that, but not stuff about romantic love or sensuality. I tend to find that more boring, you know. It can get you into some gnarly territory if you start to rely on it too much. It's nice because sometimes you want to believe that there's this chivalric type of beauty, but oftentimes it can just go into a rabbit hole of hedonism. Would I not have to be a barrel of memory if I wanted to carry my reasons around with me? So notice this, to be a barrel of memory. Talking about like the weight of it, the weight of memories. You gotta have all those reasons in stock. Maybe it'll weigh on you, but at the same time, I think you'll just bury some of those reasons until someone prompts them to come up. Like, sometimes you'll have an old memory unlocked just because someone mentioned it, and that can be quite useful. It is already too much for me to remember my own opinions. And many a bird flies away. Yeah, you see that? To remember your own opinions is a lot, he says. Many a bird flies away, so he forgets even some of the things that he stands for. It's kind of funny. And now and then, I also find a stray in my dovecot that is strange to me and trembles when I place my hand on it. But what was it that Zarathustra once said to you? That the poets lie too much. But Zarathustra, too, is a poet. Do you now believe that he spoke the truth? Why do you believe that? The disciple answered, I believe in Zarathustra. But Zarathustra shook his head and smiled. Faith does not make me blessed, he said, especially not faith in me. But suppose somebody said in all seriousness, the poets lie too much. He would be right. We do lie too much. We also know too little, and we are bad learners. Maybe the bad learning part comes from not emphasizing the lesson one learned from their mistakes. Poetry isn't about really lessons being learned, but rather ideals being sought, I'd argue. Maybe when it comes to know too little, that they get lost in the sauce too much with idealism. So we simply have to lie. And who among us poets has not adulterated his wine? Many a poisonous hodgepodge has been contrived in our cellars. Much that is indescribable he was accomplished there. And because we know so little, the poor in spirit please us heartily, because when they are young females, and we are covetous even of those things which the old females tell each other in the evening, that is what we ourselves call the eternal feminine in us. Eternal feminine. Young females versus old females. And as if there were a special secret access to knowledge buried for those who learn something, we believe in the people and their wisdom. This, however, all poets believe, that whoever pricks up his ears as he lies in the grass, or on lonely, pricks up his ears as he lies in the grass or on lonely slopes, will find out something about those things that are between heaven and earth. And when they feel tender sentiments stirring, the poets always fancy that nature herself is in love with them. Ooh. So, tender sentiments stirring. We get this sort of inspiration to write. I can feel that way sometimes when I'm out walking and you just see some beauty and you're like, this makes me want to write something. This makes me want to just start going on a writing spree. But I wouldn't call it as in nature's in love with me, because that's not an Islamic concept, but rather the brain juices get flowing. But I do understand what he means. Some people can see it in a different way. And that she is creeping to their ears to tell them secrets and amorous flatteries. And of this they brag and boast before all mortals. I like that, creeping into their ears to tell them secrets among the flatteries. Yeah, you can get that way when you're really into poetry. Like you've unlocked something. When you get good at it, you think about it and it builds in you and you feel like you've touched something. I think in an Islamic way you'd say, none can encompass any of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will, none of his knowledge, except as he permits. So if you got this insight into something, you noticed a pattern, you saw something that inspired you, well, now you can write about that, but you have to know that all wisdom and all beauty, everything that has been said or will be said, is because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It changes the way in which you view the world. So when he mentions this, they brag and boast before the mortals, they're not demigods. If they don't check their ego, make sure they give some credit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then they're going to run into some problems. When you thank Allah and know that all the wisdom comes from Him, I think you'll be more at ease. I remember when I used to write some political posts, I had a friend on Facebook back in the day who would take my posts and copy and paste them as her own. And we were friends, and I could see she was doing this. And I was like, that's not, you're taking credit for my stuff. But at the end of the day, all knowledge is gonna flow back to whence it came. And so I'm sure I'm not the only one who's thought certain things, so can't hold on to it as if I have it. Put it back out there into the world. Alas, there are so many things between heaven and earth, of which only the poets have dreamed. Yeah, the the poetic mind is definitely one that ponders and can go into this sort of vortex of beauty. And especially above the heavens, for all gods are poets, parables, poets, prevarications. Verily, it always lifts us higher, specifically to the realm of clouds. To the realm of clouds. Now, I do a lot of cloud watching. I love seeing the depth, the distance, the height. When the sky is just all blue, it's like a vast sea. It's like staring into the ocean. You can't see the bottom. You can't see the top when you look at the sky. But when you see clouds, it's like there's this depth to it that reminds you how tiny you are. But it's also comforting and relieves stress out of my chest. And when you relax and look up at the sky and the clouds and you slow down, you do become more poetic. If you write poetry while being outside and letting your mind be at its best when it's flowing, you write parables. You do feel lifted up higher. You change as well in a sense. I think that you will also lift up more morally the more time you spend looking up at the sky and just thinking about existence. When someone is deeply sad, they have a tendency to go and do heavy sighs and look up outside. I had a manager once who I really disliked, but he would do that a lot. I didn't dislike him because of that, obviously, but he would do these serious expressions and then keep looking out the window. And then when I was at a job I didn't like, we had a very nice view and I was able to see outside, and that really helped me to get through my day. And I would think all kinds of stuff to pass the time. So it lifted my spirit up, definitely. That's why if you live in a concrete hell like Philadelphia, or just some terrible places where there's not even nature, you can't really see the sky too well because of skyscrapers, you gotta really examine your mental health. Upon these we place our motley bastards, and call them gods and overmen, for they are just light enough for these chairs. All these gods and overmen. Ah, how weary I am of all the imperfection, which must at all costs become event. Ah, how weary I am of poets. When Zarathustra spoke thus, his disciple was angry with him, but he remained silent. And Zarathustra too remained silent, and his eyes had turned inward as he were gazing into vast distances. At last he sighed and drew a deep breath. I am of today and before, he said, but then there is something in me that is of tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, and time to come. I have grown weary of the poets, the old and the new. Superficial they all seem to me. Superficiality is very true, and shallow as seas. You know, I tried to enter a poetry competition and I wrote some really good poetry, I believe. It was more warrior-esque, war, stuff like that, and it didn't get in. And then I saw that the teacher, she had a poetry club, and her star students, when I'd read their poetry, it's all bubbly and cutesy, fartsy, and they all got in the magazine article. She claimed to like Edgar Allan Poe, but if you actually do like Edgar Allan Poe, I think you'd understand more of the cynical poetry, the raw poetry. It's more authentic and speaks to the human condition, and sometimes it can have a fantastical end, but I didn't get in. And I remember I wrote this poem about a Native American boy who almost got crushed by a bison when he was trying to go through his manhood test. It was a very good poem. I was really proud of it. It was almost like a short story, and the teacher said it was too violent, and I was like, man, shut up. You know, the movies like Gladiator with Russell Crowe, Game of Thrones, when you see tragedy, it makes it more real when there's some toughness and survivalist aspect to it and overcoming, but they all were cutesy. And even when I did some really cutesy poems, like about my guinea pig, he's now dead, but Cusco, those did really well, and I have a great talent for that, but they're just like flowers. It's just not the same. I like taking pictures of flowers, but I don't necessarily like writing poetry about flowers. Their thoughts have not penetrated deeply enough, therefore their feelings do not touch bottom. See, the touching bottom is something that I really liked. You gotta go deep down and see what it's all about. Some lust and some boredom, that has so far been their best reflection. All their harp jingling is to me the breathing and fitting of ghosts. What have they ever known of the fervor of tones? Fervor of tones. Perfectly said. Nor are they clean enough for me. They all muddy their waters to make them appear deep. Muddying the waters to make it appear deep. That is one of the most spot on things. Wow, I haven't heard that kind of talking in a while. Definitely cool. When the water ain't clear, you can't see the bottom, and you can just have this illusion. And they like to pose as reconcilers, but mediators and mixers they remain for me, and half and unclean. Alas, I cast my net into their seas, and wanted to catch a good fish, but I always pulled up the head of some old god. Thus the sea gave him who was hungry a stone, and they themselves may well have come from the sea. Certainly, pearls are found in them. They are that much more similar to hard shellfish, and instead of a soul, often found salted slime in them. This ocean example is really cool. From the sea they learned even its vanity. It's not the sea, the peacock of peacocks. Even before the ugliest buffalo, it still spreads out its tail. It never wearies of lace fan, of silver and silk. Sulky the buffalo stares back. That's kind of true, they do. Close to the sand in his soul. Closer still to the thicket. Closest of all to the swamp. What are beauty and sea, and peacock's finery to him? This parable I offer the poets. Verily, their spirit itself is the peacock of peacocks and a sea of vanity. So, my solution then is just write more real poetry. I've done some poetry freestyles on here. You know, not as much as I'd like to. In my old Patreon, I used to write some poetries. The spirit of the poet craves spectators, even if only buffaloes. It's a good line right there. They're just like looking, they may not grasp it as much, but they may not grasp it as much, but they get it. Don't get mommy's tripod. But I have grown weary of this spirit, and I foresee that it will grow weary itself. I have already seen the poets change, with their glances turned back on themselves. I saw ascetics of the spirit approach. They grew out of the poets. Thus spoke Zarathustra. Ascetics, they grew out of the poets. Kind of showing asceticism and its link to poetry. I think that's a very true thing. A very true aspect. And when you spend time in nature, and you really dig deep, you don't just stay surface level and shallow, you can come up with some really nice parables. Very creative. Really good section. I hope you enjoyed. If you'd like to join my blog and support my content, you can do so by going to www.subscribestar.com/MilahanArchive. Hope to see you there.